Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back as we continue making our way through our 100 favorite movies of all time. Today we're on to number 47, and we're going to be talking about my number 47, which is Alien, and John also has that one on his list. I forget what the number is, John, but I'm sure you can pull that up.
I believe it was
And
70.
did we forget to put did we never put the year? I guess we never put the year. And Super, which is John's number 47, the polarizing James Gunn movie. Alien, not so much, that's for sure. But we will talk about these two movies, Ridley Scott, James Gunn, two of the bigger names in Hollywood right now. James Gunn has really blown up since movies like Super. And it's funny to see how these early movies really made him, something like Slither and Super. Even though they were not popular at the time that they were released. And now he's probably making some of the best received of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies.
Yeah, I mean, James Gunn is a polarizing figure based on his past and everything like that. But while he's getting all this attention for his Guardians of the Galaxy movies and his latest Suicide Squad movie that released this last summer, Super's just this movie that's kind of faded into the background. Nobody really talks about this movie.
Mm-hmm. It's much like Slither, though, and obviously we start with Super because Alien you might have heard of. Super you might actually not have. But it's very much like Slither in that essence. I always loved Slither. I always thought Slither was just an amazing movie. I thought it was super fun. Nathan Fillion playing who he's playing, and Elizabeth Banks, at the height of her career, she's so good in that movie. It was just one of those really fun B movie. Aliens attack, what's going to happen next? To me, it's like the better version of Men in Black. It's just not like a buddy thing like Men in Black is. And the one thing I will say about James Gunn is his style is so distinctive all the time. It is distinctive all the time. And when I was looking up this movie, because I very much enjoyed it this time, I've seen it once before. I remember liking it. I don't remember if I loved it or what. It was pretty much when it came out. But I very much enjoyed this movie. When I was looking up reviews for it on why people didn't necessarily like them, a lot of the reviews said it was because it was all over the place tonally. And I could not have disagreed more. I felt that the entire movie was very much meant to be a pitch black comedy that was so unbelievably dark throughout that, to me, it never strayed from that. It never became too comedic or too dark. It was meant to be dark and comedic. So that's just where I stand with that. I thought this was very, very good this time around. I think Paige and Wilson are fantastic together. I love the supporting cast. What's his name? Michael Rooker is so funny in this movie. Kevin Bacon gives a good turn. Liv Tyler's in it for 3 seconds because that's what she does, and she gets paid way too much money to be in stuff. But I really like the deconstruction here. I like how over the top a lot of it is. It very much works for me. I could see why it wouldn't work for some people, but I also wonder if this had come out in 2016 or 17 after so many movies were superhero movies, would this have been a breath of fresh air and kind of been what Deadpool ended up being? Because Deadpool felt so out of left field for what people were used to in the genre.
Yeah, Super coming out in 2010 is just a really awkward time because at this point, this is the beginning of the superhero craze, really, right? We're 2 years removed from 2008, which was our big superhero year to kick things off. We hadn't gotten to the height of 2012 when the Avengers had come out yet. And it also it was awkwardly timed because it came out at the same time that Kick-Ass came out, which was supposed to be another satirical look at superhero genre in general and kind of how ridiculous the genre is. But it was the critically acclaimed one. It was the one that got all the pop attention, and Super kind of was just pushed off to the side despite being the far superior film in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Kick-Ass just worked because it had Nicolas Cage, it had Chloe Grace Moretz. They were a little bit more Rainn Wilson never became mainstream. I know, obviously, with The Office, everybody likes Rainn Wilson and they like Dwight Schrute, but people just look at him as Dwight Schrute. He got stuck in that. And so whenever he tried to branch out from it, didn't work. Elliot Page at this time was making movies that were always freaking weird. I don't know if you've ever seen an American Crime. That is an unbelievably disturbing movie with Catherine Keener. Hard Candy, unbelievably disturbing movie with Patrick Wilson. all that she was doing was making incredibly awkward and hard to watch movies, normally about predatory type things. So, despite the fact that Juno was made, and Juno, blew everybody up, Diablo Cody,
Yeah.
Jason Reitman, everybody kind of loved Juno at the time, and I still think it's a very good movie, even though not so many people feel that way now, looking back on it. But I think it's great. That was really the only mainstream movie. And then Paige's career started to just go left, like the entire time. And there really was never that much of a critically acclaimed or anything like that. While Chloe Grace Moretz kind of had this, oh, I'm cute and I'm going to say, see you next Tuesday in a movie. And everybody was like, oh my God, where did that come from? This is amazing, because she was 13 years old when she's saying it. And that caught more people's attention than this kind of like weird sexual relationship between two like really, really depressed people.
Yeah. And I actually think that the relationship between Frank and Libby is just so sad in this movie, and it really like adds on to like how dark this movie is, because Frank is he's just so wholesome, but the reason why Frank Darby as a character works is because he seems like this wholesome guy who's just like this righteous guy going out there trying to do the right thing, but he's going about it in all the wrong ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's that contrast and the juxtaposition of like intention versus action.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes Frank Darbo's character so interesting. Whereas the character of Libby is so over the top enthusiastic about everything, but you can tell it's kind of just this front for like an empty existence.
Yeah, Libby's is to me more depressing than Frank's, because Frank's is, like you said, trying to save the world and do all of that. But Libby's is not that. Libby's is kind of psychotic. Frank's doesn't feel psychotic. Frank's just feels idiotic. I love the part where he says, how can I say shut up crime if I'm committing crime, or something like that? Whatever that line is. I think that's such a great line because it's so true. It's like, but that's always what this thing is, right? When you watch, what was it? Man of Steel. Superman literally destroys like 9 million buildings, but at least he saves the characters who are named. And that's like, one of those tropes in superhero movies of, oh, all the extras can die. Like those buildings that are getting destroyed, like let's pretend that there's nobody in those. But as long as the characters we know about survive, that's what's fine. But in reality, they're going around just beating the crap out of everybody. And in this one, yes, they're bad people, but should you be beating somebody with a wrench for dealing drugs and like beating them to death? Probably not. Like that, there's a certain line that's crossed, but it's doing that very purposely and very stylistically and in a very fun way that it really is entertaining to watch Libby and Frank just run around, beating the shit out of anybody. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad. It's just fun to watch.
Yeah. And even the characters within the universe are confused by it, because we as viewers are confused by it, because it's like we're supposed to be rooting for this person, but we're watching them commit crimes to stop crimes. And like the crimes they're committing are as equally violent or drastically more violent than the crimes that are being stopped in the process. And we even see in universe when we get later onto the film and they're talking about like the public response to the vigilantism when they find out that the victims are all criminals and all had criminal records and things like that. And you can just see the frustration. I think one of the best shots that sums up this entire movie is the shot of the police chief walking down the road as they're trying to interview him. And he's just like so frustrated by the entire situation because he's like, no, guys, this guy's going around beating people up with a wrench. He is a criminal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always that thing, but we see this so heightened in the other way. Every movie, the Batman is evil. He's the bad guy. Spider-Man, we got to take him down. Like the heroes are never seen as heroes, even though we're only seeing them do overly heroic stuff. They always have like their one little thing, but this movie is very much a guy who's not really doing anything heroic because he's crossing the line so much. And, the only thing he's really doing that's heroic is standing up to Kevin Bacon to try to get his wife back. But I also love how this, like the direction this movie goes, where it's him not caring about like he cares about the wife, he gets the wife what she needs, but it's him then realizing, oh, he actually was doing good for all of these other people, and it led to fulfillment in his life. Whereas almost every superhero movie, the only fulfillment they get is by defeating the bad guy. Like they're always missing. They never get Katie Holmes like in the first one. Thankfully, they don't get Maggie Gyllenhaal in the second one. But you know, there's always that thing that's missing for these superheroes that they can never quite put their finger on. This one, it's like, yeah, he didn't get it, but look at what it did for him, as opposed to, no, he just has to go rogue and be on his own. Yeah, he's on his own, not by choice, but he's finding fulfillment. It's totally different than what we normally. I always think about the end of The Dark Knight when he's riding off and Gary Oldman's got his epic, monologue and stuff. All that stuff is great, but this isn't. Even though this is putting the character in the exact same place, it's doing it in so much more of a emotional, realistic way, because this movie ultimately is supposed to just take place in an ordinary town.
Yeah, and it's not even like it's a large city or anything like that. It's just like what, some random Midwestern town. Like it's nothing that exciting. Population of this town's maybe like 20,000 based on like what we see. Maybe a little larger than that, but it's not a massive town. It's the setting of this, the fact that you see this vigilantism through Frank Darbo. That's a complete gross exaggeration to everything that's going on here. And I love the scene where he gets like incepted with the idea for becoming a superhero, with his dream that's just completely led on by Nathan Fillion's ridiculous character of the Holy Avenger, plus this like you got the hentai tentacles in there and like cutting his brain open so God can touch his brain to like tell him what he has to do. It's that type of comedy that James Gunn can bring that really goes underappreciated when people think about James Gunn, because he did do those Marvel movies in the middle and they didn't allow him to go that far.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like when I look at James Gunn and what James Gunn pulls off in this movie, I think it's hilarious. Like that whole scene. I love the Holy Avenger. I love that he plays Satan. I love how over the top that is. The girl who is Holly, the Holy One, she's got the huge boobs. I love that this movie, they're in the freaking leather, whatever, with the gag ball and stuff. Like, no wonder this made me this way, Satan. Like, I love how over the top that is, and that it's on the Jesus Network or All Jesus Network or whatever it is. Like, I think that that's just so funny because it is like the over the top good versus evil thing that we see on TV and all these superhero movies. But in reality, it is more like what's going on in real life, which is, well, is this the bad guy for killing the person who was going to kill this person? You know, like, where do we draw the line on that? I think it does a really good job with that. And I mean, that show is just hilarious because it does make you think like about all the drawings and everything. Oh, we got to save and we're going to do all these good things. And it's like, and here is this overly provocative character who he pals around with all the time. Like, how tight of an outfit can Catwoman wear in order to succeed at her task? Like, it's ridiculous. So I just think it's so well thought out. And I don't think it gets the credit for being well thought out, because I think people kind of, as we've said with a lot of movies on this list, as I said with Shakespeare in Love last week, as we've said with other movies earlier on, people just kind of misunderstand what this movie is going for, in my opinion. I think like when I was watching this the whole time, I was like, man, James Gunn is doing exactly what James Gunn wants to do. Now, that doesn't mean every time that just because somebody's doing exactly what they want to do, that it's going to be a good movie. There's a lot of movies like that that are flat out bad. Silence. Martin Scorsese did everything he wanted to do in Silence, and I was bored for 3 hours. But it still comes down to taste. But I think the one thing you can't argue with this movie is that James Gunn didn't succeed at putting his vision out there. And I think that that's where it kind of loses me with some of the complaints on this movie, because I'm like, everything he wanted to do is there. Everything. He made like a more mature version of like Orgasmo and made Deadpool before Deadpool. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it just worked.
Yeah, it's that big investigation into the superhero, like the ambiguity of the superhero morality, which doesn't ever really get explained to us in normal superhero movies, like you said earlier, where we're seeing the superheroes do heroic things. You know, it's that good versus evil tension that we get from the Holy Avenger versus Satan, right? But because we're seeing, hey, this is a regular guy who just kind of decided to go out and beat up criminals in order to try to find his wife, who he believes is stolen from him. And that's, I think, a very important part about this character, is that Frank believes his wife has been kidnapped and brainwashed by Jock. And so right from the get-go, we kind of, like, there are undertones of, like, okay, maybe that's what's going on. Like, people versed in the world understand exactly how, like, you know, someone like Jock operates. But, like, we're going based off of what Frank's saying here, and we don't really see enough of Liv Tyler's character to understand, Liv Tyler's character Sarah, to understand that, like, no, she kind of just was done with Frank. And when we get that at the end of the movie, it really makes you ponder, like, was everything Frank did worth it? Was, like, getting Libby killed worth saving Sarah? And then we get, like, the touching, like, you know, Sarah moves on, has a family of her own, and, like, Frank's still a part of her life. And it really just, it makes you think about, like, consequence and action, and what is it that is actually a good action and what is a selfish action.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you know, I think it is worth it because, one, Libby loved it. Libby wouldn't have wanted to go out any other way. I think that's for sure. Like, it gave her a purpose too, because what was her purpose during this entire movie? There was none.
Exactly.
Like, Libby's just running around doing nothing, like, feeling like she's wasting away. Like, so I do think that it was worth it in that sense. And I do think, like, ultimately he does play the hero. He helps somebody escape, you know, drug addiction and things like that, but in a different way. I also like, though, like, how James Gunn presents this, which is, it's a waitress and a guy who works as, like, a cook at this shitty, like, little diner. And they meet, they fall in love, they have this relationship. Of course, things start to go south. And now how's he going to save the day being from there? Like, it just, it feels like something different than we're always used to seeing our superheroes, like, you know, billionaires like Bruce Wayne, or, you know, very well kept most of the time, at least. Nobody's ever like, oh, here's, like, somebody who's just a total piece of crap. And that's what it feels like he is in this movie. It just feels like everything he can do wrong, he does wrong. So it's fun that it's in, like, this seedier area of things. You know, we've obviously seen Hitmen and stuff like that, and, you know, that ambiguity, but this is just totally different.
I mean, it all comes down to that one line that the Holy Avenger actually says, which is, all it takes to be a hero is making the choice to stand up to evil. Right? And like, that's the beauty of, like, the delusion of Frank Darbo in this film, is thinking that, like, all he has to do, if he stands up to Jock, he's the hero, right? And it's not the case, because he's just so delusional of everything. And that's the big thing with Frank's character, is that Frank doesn't have a good grasp on his own life, and he is so lost. And that's what I really think James Gunn's really pointing out, is that, like, this lack of purpose haunts the everyday person. And we all want to be someone super, someone who is more important than we are in the cog of existence. And he just presents it in such a way where, even when Frank does become the Crimson Bolt for the first time, and it's kind of like sitting there waiting for crime to happen, like, it's not different than his normal life.
Yeah, he's just wearing a stupid looking outfit. And you know, that's always fun too. I always love when it's like, yeah, you just throw on whatever. And it's, you know, it's got the zipper and all that. It's like, why is that but yeah, he's just sitting there and he's just wasting, because there isn't any crime that's happening. You know, like, he's just waiting for something to happen. But I think that's a good point. Like, so many people live like that. They're just waiting for something to happen. When is something going to happen that's going to make this all worthwhile? And I think that's something that he really dives into here with this Frank character and with Libby's character, because both of them are kind of going through the same thing. It's just one's younger and one's older, but they both have this feeling of just being lost. And maybe that's why Kick-Ass was more popular at the time, because Kick-Ass isn't nearly as depressing. This one's really friggin' depressing. Kick-Ass really isn't.
Yeah, that's a huge thing too, right? Like, the themes of this film are not lighthearted fare. They're not the they're not the type of, this isn't the type of movie you're throwing on to be happy at the end of. This is the type of movie where you want to be contemplative, and you're just like, okay, what's my purpose, and like, how ridiculous can this get? That's what Super is.
Yeah, and I think it lands. I really do. I think I think that it came out at the wrong time. I just think we've discussed that, but I really think that that's what it ultimately came down to. It almost felt like stunt casting with Kevin Bacon. It didn't it was still kind of in that Kevin Bacon is Kevin Bacon kind of phase. Now I think that Kevin Bacon would be a better casting choice, even, or be better, more well received. Rainn Wilson was just never going to do it as a leading man, even though I think he's great in this movie. He just doesn't really do it for people. And I just think that it was ahead of its time. It just wasn't what people were looking for yet. If James Gunn went out and made Guardians of the Galaxy, and then 2 years later released Super with the exact same movie, nothing changed, people probably considered a masterpiece. Seriously.
Yep. I honestly think the casting of Rainn Wilson in this movie is so perfect, because he is such an average man. And he's landing on the dorkier spectrum of average man. And obviously that's brought on by the fact that what most people know him from is The Office and everything. But he plays that role really well. And his casting in this movie just makes it all the more believable that this is actually something that someone would go out and do.
Yeah, because there's nothing exciting about him at all. He is just very much a bland, you kind of feel like there's something off with him. Clearly, he's got no ego. He's trying to get his wife back, but he's had 2 great moments in his life, or 2 perfect moments, whatever it is, and everything else has just been a total waste. And so he's trying to get his wife back, but he doesn't have the guts to even stand up to this guy, at least early on. It's very much just oh, this is going to happen. And what's he going to do with it? It kind of she left him, and now he's trying to make the argument, oh, she was kidnapped or whatever it is. They're holding her against her will. And it's not really, but that's the desperation in him. And I think that Rainn Wilson does that well, because if this is, some good looking, you just don't buy it as much. Rainn Wilson is the perfect person to put in this movie.
Yeah, I think it's also really important that, we're going to draw this Kick-Ass comparison again, where Kick-Ass is this teenage character. It's so important that Frank Darbo is a middle-aged man, I feel. It really plays into how desperate this movie is at times, and how empty these people are. And it gives you the contrast then in Libby, who Elliot Page plays phenomenally. The energy that Libby has the entire time is downright grating. But it's exactly what this character is supposed to be. This over enthusiastic person who's just is an action first before thinking person, which is the exact opposite of Frank.
Even though Frank is getting there with some of his stuff, and then he immediately realizes wow, I shouldn't have done that. I mean, really, this movie is just the ultimate midlife crisis to the extreme. This is the midlife crisis of, I'm going to go out and kill people because the world's been bad to me, but I'm going to only kill the bad people so that it's okay. And we see this guy just going through delusions and everything. And every time we watch something new happen to him, we're okay, he's going off the deep end. He's going off the rails. But then he pulls himself back in, because Libby is made to be even crazier, which is what grounds him, because then he can say, well, we're not supposed to just kill everybody. We can't just do and she drives the car into the guy's legs. It's one of the funniest things. I die every time. It's so funny. And when she just gets out and starts laughing, it's just perfect. It really is.
Yeah. And just Libby's insistence on going to beat up whatever the character's name was, I think it was Jeremy or something like that, who may have keyed her friend's car.
Yes. And then afterwards, what do you mean may have? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's James Gunn just presented everything in such a way where it just makes this film so relatable despite how overblown it is. And it addresses all of these superhero tropes that now we're so tired of. Like the fact that I love the no buts scene.
Mm-hmm.
Where the guy's like, dude, I know it's you. I just saw you go get changed.
Yeah.
And like he still just like smacks him with the pipe wrench. And it's just like everyone here saw your face, but apparently that doesn't matter because you're now in this costume.
Yep. Of course. Why would it matter now? No, I mean, I love it. I think and I do like though that it's addressing those things of like how obvious it is that it's him. Like even the other guys, like Kevin Bacon's crew, they're like, that's Frank Darbo. Like that, like they know who he is the entire time. He's not well hidden.
Yeah.
But again, it's leaning into that trope, kind of like when we were talking. It's funny because it's a different movie, completely different, but Shakespeare in Love with the whole like not meant to look like not really meant to be a boy, not really meant to look all that different from what he really looks like. Although the one image that they draw where he's got like the really thick neck with the veins,
it's hilarious.
Yeah,
and you can just Rainn Wilson's facial expression when he sees that picture is just so electric.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. He's just so proud of himself.
Yep. Yeah, and I will say before we move on, like the opening sequence, like the opening credit sequence is so entertaining, just unbelievably entertaining.
Oh yeah, that song's an absolute banger.
Yeah, and then it's got all the animation and the over the top animation. I also like that this movie later on, like when he really is believing he's a superhero, I love that it starts putting in like the bam, whack, kapow, like all that stuff.
Yeah,
I think that's great because it's like now he feels like he's a super. It's no longer he's just pretending. Now he feels like he's doing this.
Yeah, and then I also like that when they finally decide to go like charge Jock's mansion, they're just like making pipe bombs.
Yep. I hope it works. And she throws it. It works. Yeah, it's great. It really is.
It's just a very fun ride. Jason just doesn't get enough credit for this. I'm hoping with his like Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, people go back and visit this film more now.
Yeah, we'll see. I think they will. And I think that it'll honestly help it. I do think that this is going to be more well-liked than most people would honestly think they would like it. Because it was for me. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did this time. Especially, I'd only seen it probably the first time when I was 18, and now it's 12 years later. Like, who would have thought? So, yeah, holds up for me as far as I'm concerned. So check that one out for sure. All right, John, what was the best thing you watched this week?
Well, I watched a few things. I rewatched Licorice Pizza yesterday, so that was fun. Because that movie's very good. It's actually better on a second watch. I had to give a shout out to Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie, which is one of the most absurd movies you'll ever watch. But holy cow, Tim and Eric just know how to do comedy unlike anyone else, and it's so funny.
Yeah, Tim and Eric are nuts, man. They're nuts, and they are not for everyone. That's for sure.
Oh, they definitely aren't. I was a little worried. I had a bunch of friends come over to watch it, and luckily everyone loved it. But like, there's literally a scene in that movie where like 4 kids shit on a guy, and it's a wild movie. It's a wild movie. It's super funny. If you like that type of like absurd, definitely worth watching. But the best movie I did watch this week was The Cranes Are Flying. There's no question about it. That film's absolutely amazing. Just seeing like the home front of World War II from the Russian perspective, and then like the scene. There are some beautiful montages in that film that are just some of the best ever made.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about that movie earlier on, and that scene with the wedding scene is just ridiculous. One of the best scenes. Just kills me. So, still will forever hate HBO Max for literally describing that movie as what you find out with 5 minutes remaining. So anyway, very weird. But I had the week of 3-star movies. So Austin Powers and the Spy Who Shagged Me, I gave 3.5. That's the best one I watched this week. I love that movie. I think it's hilarious. I love Mini Me, Fat Bastard, all that stuff. Here's the 3-star movies I watched because I just need to like give you guys an idea of how I literally couldn't find a genre that had a great movie. Austin Powers International Mystery, The Fugitive, The Life of Emile Zola, Cimarron, and Chungking Express. Now, I know those last two are probably the most shocking to people, and those are the two I'm going to talk about. Chungking Express is the best one I watched this week. Wong Kar-wai really gets phenomenal reviews. I think that it's a little overrated, but then again, Wong Kar-wai movies for me normally take a couple viewings before I really appreciate them. We'll definitely get California Dreamin' stuck in your head. You'll wonder where it is, and then in the second half, it doesn't stop playing. So that was the best one I watched this week. But I got to say, with Cimarron, normally generally considered the worst Best Picture winner of all time. And I don't think people could be more wrong. I thought it was a super impressive movie. The audio was terrible. It's very hard to hear. The movie was made in 1931. They really didn't know what the hell they were doing yet. And a lot of this is shot outside. So that does not make things easier. But this movie generally gets hated on a lot for being racist and things like that. And I actually think that for a movie that takes place in like 1889 through 1929, which is obviously a very problematic time, right? Post-Civil War, all of that, and now American expansion, and let's get all of the indigenous people out of here. I actually think this movie handles it very well and actually does show respect towards people that movies in 1931 weren't showing. Even if there are characters who are still saying very problematic things, most of the time they're being offset by people who are like, you're a racist, shut up, which I was surprised based on the reviews of the movie. I definitely think it's worth checking out. It is an impressively scaled movie. I think it's very massive, and it's one of the first ones that was like that. That was also talking. People forget that with movies a lot of times. Audio was not around. And so for it to happen like that, this was a tough movie to pull off, and I think they did really well with it. If you can understand what they're saying, good. If you can't, you're still going to be like, man, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So I was into it. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, Jordan Alford, I gave Chungking Express 3 stars. Like, Wong Kar-wai makes movies that are different, and that's really it. So there you go. Boom. 3 stars. All right. Let's move on to Alien, which is my number 47. And John, I think it was your number 69 or 70. It was one or the other on
70,
that.
I think.
Okay. So this comes in at my number 47. Huge Alien fan. It is my second favorite of Ridley Scott's movies. Number 1 I have as Gladiator, just a couple spots ahead of this one. It's always weird to me with Alien because Alien came out just before Blade Runner. And Blade Runner has tended to show up on top 100 lists, like AFI's top 100 lists and things like that, more often than Alien. And I don't think there's a stupider opinion out there. I really believe, like, if you're looking for slow sci-fi, this is the ultimate in that genre. Ultimate in sci-fi horror, this is perfection, without a doubt. I think that I personally dislike Blade Runner a whole lot. I really, really hate that movie. But like, I just don't understand. Like, when you look at those two movies side by side, Alien is so intriguing. It's one of the most entertaining of the horror genre. I love that there are no main characters in this movie. Like, there is no one main character in this movie. We know that there's 7 of them. They're all recognizable to us now, probably with the exception of Veronica Cartwright, who really isn't that noticeable because at least Yaphet Kotto was in Live and Let Die. So at least people would know him from that. Harry Dean Stanton's pretty recognizable. John Hurt, Sigourney Weaver, obviously, Tom Skerritt. Really insane cast. And then Ian Holm. It's an insane cast. And I love that they make the decision to put Tom Skerritt as first build and not go anywhere beyond that. That's it. You don't know who the main character of this movie is at all. They do a great job of focusing on each one of them without making it feel like someone's story. Now, obviously, we all look back and we go, oh, well, it's going to be Ripley's story. But when you're watching that the first time, you have no idea that Sigourney Weaver is the main character of that movie. She's just not. This movie is very much just the whole crew is the main character. And how are they going to take down the alien ship? And John Hurt being the first one to die, it's absolutely shocking for a whole lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost what Wes Craven does with Drew Barrymore when he comes to Scream. Like, John Hurt is the most recognizable actor at the time when this movie came out. And for him to be the first death in this movie is wild. It's just, it's so astonishing because he's literally the last person you expect to die in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And his character is the one that kind of starts to feel like Ripley and I forget what Tom Skerritt's name is, the captain, but they start to have like a little bit of like a thing and like, is it romantic? Like, who knows? But you do feel like everybody's kind of got their thing. Harry Dean standing off at Coda arguing about they want their fair shares and things like that. They're not going to bring the shit. Like, and then John Hurt's kind of got like the most down to earth mentality. He's staying out of the fights. He's doing whatever. Ian Holmes just kind of weird. Veronica Cartwright definitely doesn't feel like the main character of this movie. Definitely feels like a little bit of the outsider here. Probably like the 7th most important, even though she's the 3rd last to die or whatever it is. She's the 3rd. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. There you go. She gets 3rd place pretty much in the Alien Kills You Olympics. But John Hurt's thing is crazy. When he's going down, you're like, okay, this is our main character. Like, he's going to go down. And the one thing with this movie too, all the other Alien, Predator, those types of movies that have tried to follow this have never once been able to successfully build the suspense the way that Ridley Scott builds the suspense for the first time. That John Hurt confronts this thing and it jumps on him. They are never able to build. I know in like Prometheus they try, in Aliens they try. They are never as successful as Ridley Scott is in this one. And I would say that opening when they're walking onto that spaceship or whatever it is, and we see all these things, and it's like, where the hell are we? One of the best world building moments you're ever going to see. And it just creates so much suspense because you know the movie's called Alien. Something weird's about to happen here, but what is it? It just brilliant. Just pacing everything. It's just brilliant. It might be too slow for audiences nowadays, maybe, but to me, every horror movie needs to find a way to figure out how to do what Ridley Scott did in this one.
I mean, if you look at my top 100, you'll see, I think I have 11 horror movies left. And 9 of them are what we would deem isolation horror movies, where, you know, it's a cast of characters removed from society and kind of alone. And Alien really helped perfect the isolation horror genre. There's literally no place ever you would be more isolated than space. So what Ridley Scott does here is he takes the unknown, which is one of the biggest things. We talked about it a lot of times with horror movies previously, that the most successful ones don't show you a monster. They keep things hidden as much as possible. And that's what Ridley Scott does here, is they take the unknown. But in this case, it's just, there's this alien life form. We know nothing about it. It starts as an egg into an alien life form that attaches to someone's face, that then somehow impregnates someone and makes it another alien come out of their chest.
And it all happens very quickly.
It happens very quickly. I forgot how fast we go from face hugger to full-blown xenomorph.
Yeah.
And like the xenomorph's design, H.R. Geiger's monster design is impeccable in this film. And the decision to make it black and look like the interior of a spaceship was such a good idea, because it gives that terror of not knowing where the fear is coming from.
Yeah. And you know, this is like the quintessential alien now in movies. Like, this is the one that people think of when you think of like a scary alien. That's the one you don't want to run into. It's a perfect being or a perfect specimen. You can't even kill it because it bleeds acid. It's just incredible. And you're talking about the isolation horror genre. We have one coming up in a couple weeks that I have replacing The Shining, which is obviously isolation horror.
Isolation horror.
But I have The Descent. And The Descent does it very well too, where it gets into the human aspect of it. And then, boom, you know these women, and now there's a creature that's with them in a cave. And how are they going to get out, and how are they going to escape this creature? The one thing, though, that Alien has going for it that makes it so much better than any other horror movie like this, there's no jump scare. There's no cop out at the beginning. And I know that like when The Descent came out in 2005, it was very much something that audiences expected at that point. You couldn't make a horror movie that was going to be mainstream, and The Descent did very well at the box office, without scaring the crap out of people right at the beginning. And normally that means having a jump scare. You couldn't do what The House of the Devil does, where there's nothing for the whole beginning of the movie. You couldn't do what It Follows does and be hugely successful, because It Follows doesn't really have a jump scare, even though the girl being disfigured is crazy. But that movie wasn't a massive mainstream success. The Descent was, because it has that one jump scare. But then it takes its time, and it only has one more later on until we actually get to the creature. Alien has 0 before the creature. This movie is just the story of these people. There's no fake anything. what's going on with Mother? What is this weird thing? Where are they? Why are they doing this? What is happening? Boom. He just got attacked by the face hugger. And even that's not meant to be a jump scare. It's meant to just be a part of the story that happens. The first real jump scare is when the thing bursts through his chest. That's the most terrifying part, but that's not even a jump scare. That's when all of a sudden that movie to me just turns into like, okay, this is straight up horror.
Yeah, exactly. And what's smarter about the way that Ridley Scott approaches this movie is that, is the xenomorph the most terrifying part of this movie? That's the question that Ridley Scott suggests in this entire thing, because we have this android who's kind of made this entire situation happen, right? And like, it makes you really wonder of like, is the unknown, what could be out there in the stars, more dangerous than what we can create ourselves?
Yeah.
And again, human hubris, because it always comes down to human hubris.
But it really is so, like they're going to go save whatever. And then you find out, but I do love that you end up finding out like, nope, it's actually not a rescue mission. It's a keep the alien mission being sponsored by whatever network, whatever NASA has become at this point, to make sure that, this alien life form gets back safely. That's all it is. And another one with him being robotic or, whatever, an android. Alien just never did it again. I love the android in the second one. So entertaining. I love when he plays the game with Bill Paxton. That part's hilarious. But, the surprise or the shock or the wanting it to be a surprise, or like, now we must have an android on every ship. Like, this Ian Holm part is so great when he starts malfunctioning. And then you realize like, wow, this was actually all a part of that plan. It's just so brilliantly done, because it's like, no, they were never meant to survive this. Whoever put them out there knew that they were going to fail and was okay with that, because they wanted this creature, because they knew something was going on with that, which leads into the whole Prometheus story, which they dropped the ball pretty hard on.
Yeah, I'd rather not talk about Prometheus.
Yeah. It's okay.
The point where Ripley goes and talks to Mother and like gets the protocol and says crew expendable, that's the moment your heart completely sinks. You're just like, oh, no one's making it out of this alive.
And they weren't meant to. They're not supposed to. So they're not going to make it out. They're not going to make it out. Like, this is supposed to be a failure, and the only one who's going to survive is the android, because nothing's going to happen to the android. Or at least that's what they presume. Or even if it does, the android doesn't care, because the android's an android.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love like all those little twists and things like that. This whole, like, at first it's them versus just, okay, we've been woken up early. Why? Then there's an alien. Then it's the whole realization that actually this is being planned against us. Then it's, okay, everybody, now it's just a survival movie. And then it's, how is she going to possibly defeat this thing? Like, I love like the different stages of this movie, that it's not just one thing or the other. It keeps on working its way through each thing. I think like I said, I think this movie is perfectly paced. Some people would say it's too slow. I think it's absolutely perfectly paced.
Yeah. And the fact that it changes from, it's really smart, because it's like, starts with the exploration aspect of it, where they're like investigating this signal. And then it gets to the creatures, like the chest bursters burst at this point, and they're hunting this creature to like try to contain it, only to realize that they're actually the ones being hunted.
Yeah. Yeah. And that we don't really know why this thing wants to kill all of them too. I like that. It's not like, it doesn't seem like it's just hungry.
It's not, because it's not eating them. Like, and it's kind of one of those things that's never really explained in the entire franchise. Granted, a lot of the movies in the franchise are really bad, despite the phenomenal directors attached to all of them. But it's one of those things that, like, that's what's most terrifying, because this alien, it's not a predator. No pun intended. But it's not hunting for a purpose. It just seems to be killing these people for the sake of killing them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what, makes it all the more terrifying because, when you have something that just kills to kill, there's no reason to stop it and there's no reason to stop. So it's just going to keep going because it's like, you're here. You're in my way. What does this alien want? We don't know, but we don't know what creatures necessarily want. Survival, maybe. And we never really get told like, oh, it's trying to survive, but it's a perfect specimen. So a perfect specimen probably doesn't want to be around anything else. However, in the director's cut, did you watch the director's cut or the regular one?
I did not. I watched the regular cut.
Yeah, I watched the regular cut too, but in the director's cut, I believe, because I've seen it before, and I think it's in the first. It is, definitely. Sigourney Weaver does go and find Tom Skerritt at some point in the movie. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I need to look this up because I should look. But that is like a terrifying thing. And maybe I'm just thinking of the second one, but I really don't think I am. So hang on. So if you want to take over here, I'm going to look this up.
One of the other things I really appreciate the film is the way that they've done the background for a lot of the films and how we get these like, phenomenal painted backdrops to make it look a little more extravagant and far more sci-fi than they could make on a set. And we just have like small interactions happening before it and a lot of like work with depth and everything. While you're watching this film, you definitely see the influence of Kubrick and Tarkovsky on the set design and every sci-fi element of it. Scott knew what he was doing when he was building this film. He was taking the sci-fi elements. There's even like Star Wars references in this film if you're paying close enough attention. It's really Ridley Scott's paying homage to the science fiction that came before it while kind of trailblazing his own new science fiction at the same time.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think that's why he kind of becomes like the king of this early on, and that's why Blade Runner is still so well received, even though it shouldn't. I am looking, yeah. So it is in the it does happen. It is in the director's cut where she goes and comes across Dallas and Brett, and then burns them both alive. I think Dallas is the only one who's actually alive, but she does kill him, and that's in the director's cut. I remember seeing that. So,
well, because it's that fear, right? It's the fear of.
No, he just wants to die because he's cocooned in.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, he's cocooned. Yeah, it's pretty horrible. It's a great scene, and I don't really understand why it was cut.
Ridley Scott made weird cuts in his movies. We all know that.
But was it his decision? I don't know.
I don't know, but there are 5 versions of Blade Runner.
Yeah, I know, and I've seen all of them, and they're all equally as bad. I'm so tired of that movie. Yeah, I just think it's a it's interesting to note that even though Tom Skerritt disappears here, he's the middle one to die. That he actually does appear in the movie again in the regular one.
Interesting, but he also had like the last time we seen Tom Skerritt in the theatrical cut of this film, though, is almost perfect in the way that he disappears. Though when he's in the vents, and then like he's trying to get away from the xenomorph because there's this weird technology that makes absolutely no sense how it could possibly work. But that's okay. It's a science fiction movie. You don't have to know how.
Yeah. And it's the future, John. It'll make sense then.
Yeah, obviously, because the future, they can make a device that pinpoints acoustic or changes in the acoustics in the atmosphere, which make it so that they can tell where a
and that's going to look shittier than a 1984, word processor.
Yeah, but like that scene in the ventilation shaft is so tense because you have Veronica Cartwright's character just talking and saying, "Oh no, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming," and Tom Skerritt's just like trying to get away, and in getting away goes right to the xenomorph.
Yeah, like it was trapping him the entire time. Yeah, and like I think too, like that's really the point of the movie. You're like, wow, who is the main character of this movie? Because that's the point. Because before that, you lose. What do you call it? You lose Harry Dean Stanton. You lose John Hurt. Then you lose Tom Skerritt, and you're like, well, what? because he's actually the third one. I said fourth, but he's the third one to die because Ian Holm goes after him. So you're like, well, wait a second. That's who like was being built up as the main character, and it seemed like him and Ripley were going to have a thing. And now he's gone, and he was the captain of the ship, and he was also first build. So what the hell is going on? Another thing, though, that a lot of these movies will try to do now, the Aliens vs. Predators, all that stuff, is they do try to kill off like the big character or something that's not Ripley and surprise you. Very rarely works now. Very rarely works. Like in Prometheus, it does not work.
No, it doesn't work in Prometheus. But I think the fact that Ripley's the survivor here is also really goes to show that Ridley Scott wasn't just looking at science fiction when making this movie, but also looking at horror films as well. This is 79. This is the height of the slasher genre. And Ridley Scott delivers a final girl that isn't kind of viewed the same way as our other final girls that have preceded her. But Ripley is a final girl in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. And she starts to all of a sudden become very scantily clad, which is, of course, what the rage was in those 70s slasher movies. So that's kind of interesting, too, how that ends up happening. But also, she doesn't have that feeling of like a pushover. She was always a strong-willed character. We see that early on in this movie. If you really watch the character development in this movie, she doesn't have to develop all that much. She is what she is the entire time. And it makes sense that she would be the last one to survive because she's about the mission, about doing things the right way, which we see later on or early on. And she's about just making sure that, she survives. Like everybody needs to survive. She doesn't care who she leaves out or if she has to leave people in the air duct, whatever. She doesn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really nice that we don't get any backstory on any of these characters other than what is shown on the ship itself and I guess on the planet as well. But we're not like delving into these characters' backstories. It's a bold choice not to develop these characters more, but you don't have to because you're more focusing on their reactions to a situation than who they are as people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
I actually watched Aliens for the first time ever. This week. I know. I don't know how, but it was
literally zero sense.
Only movie from the entire franchise I had never seen.
That was my favorite one for a while. Like, I love that. It's a great action movie.
It is a great action movie. I mean, James Cameron knows how to take a science fiction horror movie and turn it into an action movie for sure.
He does.
But one of my complaints about Aliens is that Ripley gets this like weird maternal instinct with Newt in that movie. And it's not properly explained because they cut out the scene in which they explain that Ripley's daughter dies while she's been floating out in space. So like we don't know about that maternal instinct. And I really enjoy that this first movie just forgoes any of that. And that it's just so much more focused on the survival aspect of getting through this incident and surviving so they can return back to Earth.
Well, that's the thing. Like all 7 of these people could have been forced to do this because they were murderers. You still want them to survive because we don't know that. Like, and I do think that that's important. I mean, it's the same thing. Like I was talking about the Descent earlier. The Descent decides that once they go on the trip, it's only women. There's no men in the movie. Like at the beginning, there is. Her husband's in it for a brief period of time. But once they actually get over the opening, it's all women. It cuts out all the BS love story stuff that we see in so many of these movies for no real reason. You get the backstory on one character, and then everybody else just kind of comes in and they talk about stuff. This one, I love. We're doing our job. We just want to go home. That's what work is. And it treats it that way. And we know who the engineers are and who the smarter people are and who the dumber people are and who the people who are disrespected just from their interactions. But we don't need to know, oh, well, when I was playing football, like none of that stuff matters. It's all about what's happening in the moment and, the relationships developing as they're actually, going through it.
Yeah, I mean, the film sets up a pecking order with the first conversation we see. The fact that we have, like, the 2 engineers talking about, like, hey, we want a fair share of the cut. And everyone's like, no, you'll get your share of the cut. It just shows the power structure of this crew so well in such a small amount of time that as we progress through the film, you do feel like you know them despite not knowing anything about any of these characters.
Yeah. But you still get that survival instinct where you care about them. It's a hard thing to do, to make you care about characters that you really don't know anything about.
Yeah. We have no reason to be rooting for any of these characters other than the fact that they're in this situation in the first place.
Now, is this your highest rated Ridley Scott? Or is it your second highest rated Ridley Scott?
I believe it's my highest. Honestly, after this rewatch, it's going to fall down a bit, I believe, for me.
That's funny. It's going to fall a little bit. I've been re-ranking as I go. It's going to fall a little bit for me too, but I think it's kind of like it's a product of its own success, because we sit here and we know that this movie is good, but it's still like, it's almost like, because we've seen it so many times, does that actually, make it hurt a little bit? Like, does that hurt it, not make it hurt? You know what I mean?
For sure. I don't think so. I think it was just, I think this time I'm watching it, I think while it's very influential on isolation horror, I think isolation horror has been done much better since 1979. So, like, it's not holding that part into me. I think I've watched a lot more science fiction movies since like the last time I had watched this and made my list, and I think that's been impacted a lot. And I think, like, there are some science fiction movies that I had below it on my list, like Annihilation, I find is a better science fiction movie than Alien is. And then I find, like, the horror movies I have further up are better horror movies than Alien is. So it's just like trying to find that balance of where it sits amongst all of that.
Yeah, which makes sense. I think for me, the thing with Alien is that I could sit down and watch it any night at any time and look forward to every single moment that's going to come up in the movie.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is definitely one of those movies that you never really grow tired of it. It's one of those movies that you're always perfectly content with sitting down and watching.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a once a year watch. Like, it really is. It has that rewatchability, which is why I dropped it a little, but not much. And there still might be movies ahead of it that I end up saying, you know what, let's drop that one behind it. And it ends up in, like, almost the exact same spot, just based on what I've seen so far this year in my top 100 recently. I've just moved it down just a couple notches, but
yeah. But I mean, it's undeniable to say, like, this isn't one of the most influential science fiction movies, because it kind of, like, pushes the boundary of, like, the sci-fi horror genre. It is, like, probably the pinnacle of sci-fi horror, in all honesty. Like, and a lot of people do view it that way, which does make it very interesting that it's a movie that, when compared to, like, Ridley Scott's other works, is kind of, like, kept out of those, like, AFI top lists and stuff like that.
Yeah. I just think that's funny that, like, this has been put to the side for Blade Runner, which I just don't understand. I really don't.
I think it's a genre thing is what it comes down to.
Yeah, maybe. But I almost respect it more for being able to tell the line of both.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything else about Alien?
Nope.
All right, next week we're moving on to our number 46s. John's talking 1984's Best Picture winner, Amadeus, and I'm talking 2002 City of God, the Fernando Morales movie. If you haven't seen either of these, you've been living under a rock. They're good ones. I haven't seen Amadeus in a very long time, though, so I'm very excited to watch it again. Rented it from the library, borrowed it from the library. Got it sitting over there. 3 hours long. Can't wait. City of God, that one I own. Very much looking forward to that one. That's a Brazilian movie, so should be an interesting week. Two very different movies, but, two narrator-heavy movies, too, which is interesting because we have one about Salieri and the other one with Rocket just talking the entire time. So excited to see what everybody thinks about that. We'll get back to that. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/Survivor Specialist. John and I are about to record our Nightmare Alley podcast. We've already done Licorice Pizza and The Power of the Dog. So go over there, check those out. $5 and up patrons are getting access to all of that. And we'll see you all next week.